Good evening. My name is Myra Olenek, and I am the director of the Peters Township Public Library, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for our third Novel November. Seeing this packed house is such a tribute to the hard work of our Peters Township Library Foundation, the Peters Township Library staff, and to our community of readers who have gathered to spend this Novel November evening together with Anna Quindlen. It's funny how reading is a solitary activity that connects you to so many other people, like we have here tonight. Anna enjoys a relaxed conversation format, and so do we. So tonight, Maura Kelly, who is the passionate president of the Peters Township Library Foundation and an avid reader who has, by the way, read every one of Anna's books, will be weaving many of Anna's favorite topics into tonight's conversation, along with the questions that many of you suggested to us online. But first, to set the stage for this special evening, and backed by popular demand from our previous Novel November with Tim O'Brien in 2018 and Ya Jessie in 2017, is Room 100, an auditioned a cappella group composed of 20 students from Peters Township High School. They will be giving us a sneak peek tonight into the variety of difficult genres they can perform, just like the books we read. They will be debuting tonight's 2 songs for the Kettering National A Cappella Festival this weekend in Dayton, Ohio. Directed by Ryan Parati, who doubled as our keyboard player this evening, this group has performed at the Kettering A Fest for 4 years in a row. It is one of the largest weekends of a cappella music nationwide, and Room 100 was selected as the first group to perform at tomorrow's Friday night showcase. Their first song, entitled Should Have Been Us, will be followed by a high-energy composition called Past Jazz. Please give a warm welcome to Room 100.
So while our tech crew is setting up for our talk this evening, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Maura Kelly, and I'm president of the Peters Township Library Foundation. Our mission is to support the Peters Township Library both financially and with volunteers. Many of you here tonight joined us in 2017 to welcome Ya Jessie to our community, and last year many of you were here for our Tim O'Brien program. This year, for our third Novel November, we're welcoming Anna Quindlen. Anna Quindlen is here tonight because she also loves stories and the wonderful stories that are housed within our library. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of 9 novels, 9 nonfiction books, 13 of which are bestsellers. Through her writing, Anna's been teaching us about the human experience for 5 decades. She's an ambassador for the humanities, and tonight I have the incredible privilege to join her in conversation to learn more about what goes on inside her sharp mind. Please join me in welcoming Anna Quindlen to Peters Township. Got it?
I think so.
Okay. Anna's far more used to this than me.
You know, because of all of this, I was feeling quite impressed with myself a few minutes ago. Until I listened to that a cappella group, and now I just feel like the person who had the privilege of following them to this stage.
Aw, nice. Okay, can you hear me? I may just hang on to this. Okay, so tonight, Anna and I are just gonna have a conversation. I've prepared some questions, and for those of you who know me, I've over-prepared, so we'll probably end up cutting some of them. Tonight, some of our guests here submitted questions in advance through our online ticketing, and I've made every attempt to include those questions in our conversation. So to start, we have a lot of book clubs here tonight, and so I thought we'd start with talking about books. So the first question is, you're snowed in and you've lost power. What book are you hoping to find on the shelf, and what's cooking on the gas range while you read?
Ooh, oh gosh. It totally depends on what kind of mood I'm in. What's cooking is, if we're snowed in, then it's probably going to be either stew or pot roast. First of all, because the smell of it will make everybody happy and forget that we don't have any power. Mm-hmm. And second of all, because it will taste delicious afterwards. But with reading, it so much depends on what kind of a mood you're in, whether you want to read a really good thriller. And then I might go to my old shelf of Nio Marsh's, which I love, or Patricia Wentworth, or more contemporaneous, I'd turn to Tana French, or Kate Atkinson, or Denise Mina. Or if I'm in a completely different kind of mood, I might reread one of the big thick Dickens, from which I've learned so much over the years, or somebody who's more of a miniaturist, Alice McDermott, who I think is one of the finest novelists working today, Amy Bloom, ditto. But again, it totally depends on what mood I'm in. I think that's the extraordinary thing about reading, that whether you're feeling down or up, whether you're feeling contemplative or a little bit silly, whether you're hunkering down or you just want to have your mind taken away, there's always a book for it. It's a great miracle of our time, because if you look at what's inside any book, from the perspective of, say, a 3-year-old, all they're seeing, maybe a 2-year-old, all they're seeing are lines and circles and loops and whirls. And the fact that you can look at those same lines and circles and loops and whirls and see a story about a captain and a great white whale that Herman Melville wrote almost 200 years ago, and be inside Melville's mind while you're reading it, it really is an extraordinary miracle what we do when we read.
I agree. So, what if you could choose a literary character to join you for your morning walk? Who would that be?
Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. No question.
That'd be a fun one.
I mean, you know, she and I have so much to discuss. Especially now that she's married to Darcy, which I think will not be as wonderful as she suspects it's going to be. But yeah, I mean, that's just sort of Exhibit A. It's interesting how so much of the great literature by and about women until probably the second half of the 20th century doesn't include particularly strong women characters. I guess if, along with Elizabeth Bennet, I'm walking, I've got Elizabeth Bennet on one side and Jo March from Little Women on the other side, and then my life is perfect. But you know, one of my favorite characters in literature is Lily Bart from Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth. But she's a character who almost from the beginning you understand is doomed, or the women of Middlemarch. Because Charles Dickens understood so much about the human heart, but almost nothing about women. None of the women in Dickens' novels are people that you cleave to in that way. It's only when we get into the 60s, 70s, and 80s that suddenly we have Isadora Wing in Fear of Flying, the kind of women who sort of, you know, kick ass and take names. And before then, to some extent, Elizabeth Bennet and Jo March stand alone, which is why they stand so tall in the minds of certain of us.
So do you have a preference for a format? Library book, hardcover, paperback, audio, ebook?
All of those except for audio. I happen to be somebody who just doesn't process information that way, except when I'm working. When I finish the first draft of a novel, I have a 5 to 7 day period during which I read the entire thing aloud, because my eye will forgive things that my ear will not. So that when I'm reading a sentence aloud and I can't breathe by the end of it, that's God's way of telling me the sentence needs a semicolon. When I'm reading it aloud, sometimes I read a line of dialogue and think, well, no one has ever spoken that way in the history of time, and so I fix it. And I also tend to write prose that I like to think has a certain kind of meter and rhythm. So if there's clunks in it, I hear it when I read it aloud. But in terms of other people's work, audio doesn't really speak to me. Every other form does. I mean, I'll read in any form at all. And you know, one of the great things about having books on devices now is that you don't run out of book. I mean, I remember once flying from San Francisco to New York, probably 25 years ago, and running out of book over about Kansas City. And man, if there had been a parachute, I would have taken it. And I finally got somebody across the aisle to lend me a book that he'd just finished, which, by the way, was not a very good book, but it was a book.
That's an emergency, I agree. Is there a room in your house that does not contain a bookshelf?
The bathroom. That's the only room in the house that doesn't contain bookshelves. I mean, we have books everywhere, and I'm always telling myself that I should cull them and give some away and so on and so forth, but it's very hard for me to do so. I mean, I just really feel like that's how you decorate. You know, you put in a couch and some lamps and then like 1,000 books, and then you're done. And conversely, when I go to someone's house, it's almost axiomatic that someone who says to me, you know, I've noticed that all 3 of your children read. How do you get your children to read? And I look around the person's living room, and there are no books. If there are bookshelves, they have like tchotchkes on them, and you know, what? So, I mean, I can't imagine what I would do without books all through the house. There's just nothing I love more than reading. I remember years ago, a wonderful editor at Random House had been given this job to do a series of books, one every month, that were smaller than regular books, and it covered a single topic. And he took a lot of different writers out to lunch, and he took me out to lunch and said, you know, we're probably thinking maybe 25 or 30,000 words about any subject you want, and if you'd like to do it, I can give you a couple of weeks to think about it. And I said, I don't need a couple of weeks to think about it. He said, really? I said, I'll write you a book called How Reading Changed My Life, because it sort of is everything to me. I mean, I really feel like so much of the person I am and have become and have dared to be is because of the things I learned through books, especially as a young woman growing up in the 50s and early 60s in the United States. I mean, you know, I mentioned Jo March, and I was just talking about her the other night because I was hosting a screening of the new Little Women movie that's coming out in December, and you should all do yourself a favor and see it because it is brilliant. It is so good. And I was talking about how, you know, here I am, I'm a little girl who wants to be a writer, and I have no idea how one does this. All I know is that in Little Women, Jo wants to be a writer. Jo's entire family assumes she will be a writer. And because we're holding this book in our hands, we know that she has become a writer. And at some level, that made my future seem possible in a way that it would not have without that book.
I think that's a good point. If you don't have a model in your life that shows you that something's possible, you can find it in a book if you're a reader.
Absolutely. And I almost think that's doubly true for girls at a certain level, that there are possibilities that open up to you through the pages of books that you just, especially for a girl of my generation, didn't see in the world around you every day.
So tell us what it was like to win a Pulitzer and to have your book chosen as an Oprah book.
Winning a Pulitzer is just about what you might expect. My former colleague Russell Baker used to say that you always know what the first line of your obituary will say, and that's true. And at the time that I won, they still did it by sending you a telegram, but they called you with the telegram. So it was 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, which was the statutory moment at which it happened, still does. And the phone in my office rang, and I had had a little bit of a sense that this might happen. And this woman said, I have a Western Union telegram for Miss Anna Quindlen. And I said, this is she. And she said, the trustees of Columbia University are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for... My goodness, this is wonderful. And I said, thank you very much. And she said, do you want me to read the rest of the telegram? I said, yes, I do. So she finished reading me the telegram, and then I knew that I had won. And I called my dad's house, and his wife answered the phone, and I said, can I talk to my dad? And she said, he's out riding around in his truck because every 20 minutes news radio says that you won the Pulitzer Prize. And that was the high point of winning the Pulitzer Prize. And the Oprah book thing actually was kind of anxiety producing from beginning to end. So I had this wonderful young Irish woman who helped me take care of my kids when they were small and when I was traveling. And I was on my way to the airport, and I called Elaine and I said, is everything okay? And she said, yeah, somebody called and said it was Oprah, but I knew it wasn't Oprah, so anyhow I told them you weren't here. And I said, did not Oprah leave a number? And she said, I didn't take down a number. So I got off the phone and I called my editor at Random House and I said, I'm not 100% sure, but I think Oprah may have called me. And she said, what did she say? And I said, well, my babysitter, didn't really take a message. And she said, stand by. So about a half an hour later, Elaine called me back and she said, okay, I think maybe it was Oprah, and here's the number. So I called back, and it was indeed Anna! It was Oprah. Anna, I have some really good news for you. And so she told me that she had chosen Black and Blue for the Oprah Book Club, and I told her I was really excited about that. Except the whole thing with the Oprah Book Club was that if you told anyone that your book was the Oprah Book Club, between the time that you were told and a month later when she came out on stage on a Friday morning and said, this is the new book of the book club, it would not be the book club book. It would disappear. In fact, when the book shipped, it only said on the box, Oprah Book Club, book number 8. No title, no author, nothing like that. So sort of for a month, in that way you do when you know a secret that you can't tell. I mean, I'd be on the subway and I'd want to just turn to people next to me and go, I'm the next Oprah book. And then I'd think, no, I can't do it. So it was anxiety producing until it finally happened. And then the book had already been on the bestseller list for the 8 weeks leading up to that. But then after it became an Oprah book, it sold, I think, an additional 400,000 copies or something. She was just an amazing force for good in publishing. And it really sort of catapulted you into another time zone of sales and popularity and all the rest.
I've always thought that Oprah's influence in creating book clubs, which are so prevalent now, I wonder if it seems to me that she was hugely influential in the number of book clubs we see now.
I don't know if that's true or not. If she is, God bless her, because I feel like book clubs put my kids through college. No, I mean, I'm always out and about, and people are always saying to me, well, no one reads anymore. And I'm like, then who are those thousands of people I'm meeting all over the country who are in book clubs? I mean, I meet people who are in nonfiction book clubs, fiction book clubs that only read the classics, book clubs that only read certain kinds of books, all male book clubs, all female book clubs. It's just fantastic how people are, connecting with each other over books all over the country, and then I have to listen to people say no one reads anymore. It's just silly. See, that's all the book clubs.
Where is Miller's Valley located?
It's in the mind of readers. I mean, one of the exciting things for me about Miller's Valley, which is a novel that is about what's called a drowned town, a place where the government decides that what is really needed is not a small town but a big reservoir, and they move everybody out and let the water cover the land, is that I think there were 8 different states when I was on book tour where people came up to me in signing lines and said, I grew up in Miller's Valley. Now, I've never lived in a drowned town. I don't know that much about drowned towns. I only found that term of art one day when I was Googling something, and I was so excited because it's such a felicitous phrase, a drowned town. But all these people had that actually happen in their lives. And one of the things that it brought home to me is, if you can imagine it, it will have happened. No matter how far-fetched it seems, no matter how crazy it seems. I mean, at the time that George Orwell wrote 1984, he thought he was making up something that seemed utterly impossible. And if he were living today, he would know that he wrote realistic fiction. It just was kind of thrilling for me to realize that all these people were convinced that I was writing about a real place, when it was a place that for 2 years had existed only in my imagination. But one hoped existed so persuasively and realistically in my imagination that therefore it could live in other minds, including the minds of people who had actually had the experience I was describing.
Which had to be very gratifying to you that so many people said that.
When people really respond to novels on a powerful human level, what I do for a living is very peculiar, and it's very solitary. I mean, I spend most of my time in a little room, either at the top of one house in New York or set out in a field in another house in Pennsylvania, all by myself, making up pictures in my head. And sometimes it makes you feel a little nutty, that in some ways this is more real to you than real life. And when readers respond to that, it just makes you feel as though you were hitting something when for a long time you were just cruising along on hope, and the hope becomes a reality when people say, yes, I know these people. I know these people that you've been living among alone, and that you invented out of whole cloth, and that you've tried to breathe life into.
So you left a successful career in journalism to focus on both your family and your writing as a novelist. In your time of deciding to do that, what was the most difficult part of that decision for you?
Well, first of all, it really had nothing to do with my family. I was already working at home around my kids' school schedules the whole time I was a columnist. And frankly, I couldn't have stood one more minute of them. I mean, I was with them all the time. But my experience is that when women decide to do what they want to do, somebody has to say that it's about spending more time with their family, because women just can't be given widespread permission to do what they want, or who the hell knows what'll happen. If you're really going to go back to the genesis of why I decided to do that, the genesis goes back to when I was 19 years old and I nursed my mother through the end stage of ovarian cancer. Because my mother had a very humdrum, ordinary life. She didn't work outside the home. She wasn't highly educated. She had 5 kids in 10 years. But when she was dying, she really wanted to stay alive. And the lesson that I took from that was that being alive was really, really great, and you probably didn't get very much of it. I mean, my mother was 41. So that what I kept thinking to myself ever after was, if you want to do something, you've got to do it now. You got to do it fast. So I fast-tracked through practically everything. I fast-tracked through my time as a reporter, then I fast-tracked into being a columnist, and over and over again, I took jobs that really scared me, and then discovered I could do them, and then got comfortable doing them, which was my cue to stop doing them and do something else. And that's why I'd been doing the op-ed page column for 5 years. I won the Pulitzer in year 2. I felt like I'd gotten good at it, but not comfortable at it. And my biggest fear was sitting at a restaurant table and hearing somebody at the next table say, "Remember when Anna Quindlen was really good?" I just didn't want to become tired, and I'd always wanted to be a novelist. When I was a little girl, I would just think, those people, I want to be one of them. And I'd put it aside because I'd loved the newspaper business so much. And then right after I had Christopher, my second kid, I picked it up again and started working on object lessons. And then at a certain point, I just thought, if you could do whatever you wanted, what would it be? And I thought it would be to be a novelist full-time. And so One True Thing did rather well. Black and Blue came next, and I was able to give up, my daily newspaper job, which I deeply, deeply loved, to be a full-time novelist. The hardest part about that was that I was the only woman on the Times op-ed page. And a lot of women felt like I was letting down the side. There was a certain level of disappointment. But I kept thinking, if the old deal was you got to be a wife and mother and nothing else, and if you stepped outside those lines, you were in trouble. And the new deal was you got to be the only female columnist, and if you stepped outside that line, you were in trouble, then maybe we hadn't traveled as far as we like to tell ourselves. So I developed a comfort level with doing it. I've had a comfort level with doing it ever since. Having said that, I will be a reporter until the day I die, and I have never been prouder to be a reporter than I have been in the last 3 years, when I feel like my former colleagues have done the best work of my lifetime. I sometimes feel like newspaper reporters are at this moment all that stands between us and disaster.
So you led me right into the next question. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges for a free press in our digital age?
I actually think the legacy 24-karat gold press is doing really well. You know, there's still a challenge with figuring out how to monetize digital, but the Times keeps adding digital subscribers constantly, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. You know, when the Times first put up a paywall, people acted like it was the end of civilization as we know it, even though the Times digital paywall was less expensive than buying a venti latte at Starbucks was. But people have gotten over the paywall thing. And the Times, a reborn Washington Post, which is the greatest journalism story of the last 10 years and which thrills me. NPR, some of the Brit papers, The Guardian, the BBC, they're doing spectacular work now, as are some of the television outlets. I think the biggest challenge right now is for local outlets. You know, it's fine to say everybody should read the New York Times online, but all politics starts locally. All politics starts on zoning boards and school boards, and when you start to lose your local papers, you lose an incredible resource in any town or city. I mean, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did an unbelievably distinguished job on the Tree of Life murders. For a lot of different reasons, including the fact that it had an exceptional editor at its helm. But one of them is because it didn't have as much of a learning curve as the out-of-town papers that came in. It knew how to find its way around the city and the neighborhood. And I think newspapers in smaller cities and certainly in towns have not figured out how to make digital pay in even greater numbers than the legacy publications, and that means a lot of them are in danger. And I think that would be an enormous loss to this country. I think, it's really important to know what's going on in the White House, and it's also really important to know what's going on in the municipal building. And it's the coverage of the municipal buildings that we're beginning to lose in ways that I think will be really damaging.
So are you sure about anything in this politically divided time? In a time and place when we've grown more tolerant of difference, we've also become less tolerant of differences in opinion.
I'm sure that eventually we will be all right. I'm sure that every movement, from civil rights to feminism to Me Too, is and has been a dialectic, and that when you are in the antithesis phase, when you seem to be purely reactive to the past, you have to keep your eye on the fact that a synthesis will follow, which will include more comfort and nuance with change. I'm sure that, as Tony Kushner says in Angels in America, the world only spins forward, and that this is a country that will always find its way towards progress, and I hope towards kindness. I'm sure that one of the reasons I'm sure of that is because women are finally being able to participate in ways that they always should have participated, because they steer a great straight course. I'm sure that the millennials are a great generation and that they are going to do great things for this country and the world. I'm sure that right will prevail. That's all I'm sure of.
So it's hard to believe it's been 18 years since the planes hit the Twin Towers. What were you doing on that day?
Oh my God. I was at home in New York City. I was watching television because I thought a small plane had hit the towers. Like everybody else, when the second plane hit, I realized that that, in fact, was not what had happened. It was my eldest child's 18th birthday, and we had just dropped him at college, and there was no way to be in touch with him because all the cell signals were jammed. The master of his residential college bought a cake for his birthday and brought some of the other kids from New York together to have it, and for that, she has had my undying gratitude ever since. And I was concerned about getting my other two children who were at school in other parts of Manhattan home to me, but my second son walked home, and a friend of mine picked up my daughter and brought her across town before all the bridges and tunnels and everything shut down. I had a brand new yellow Labrador puppy, and I would take her out at midnight because she could only hold it so long. And there was a firefighter who lived in my neighborhood who almost always was coming back from downtown when I was taking Bee outside. And he would stop and crouch down and play with Bee and bury his face in her fur and let her lick his face so that he could pretend that the wet on his face was from her tongue and not from his tears. There was an old man who lived on my block who said, day 2, when the wind changed, I know that smell. And I realized that he was a Holocaust survivor. It changed everything at the same time that it seems sometimes to me to have been utterly forgotten, because it was terrible and it was divine at the same time because of all the work that people did to reach out to one another and to help each other and to take food to the firefighters and to take dog food to their dogs. And sometimes I'm just so sad that spirit of camaraderie and cooperation and empathy that suffused everything up to and through the White House seems to have been abandoned in Washington. I wish that the spirit of that day could have been decanted and that we could take the cork out in D.C. and let it loose again.
So as I predicted, I have too many questions. So I think this is going to have to be our last question. So I think what I would like to ask you is, what are you reading to Arthur and Ivy?
Oh, well, in that way that second children do, Ivy is reading everything that Arthur is reading. So, you know, she's just sitting in the bed. She's 8 months old when Arthur is getting read to. Arthur has developed a powerful fondness for Frog and Toad, which is great because the Frog and Toad book that he has, which is a big compendium of all the Frog and Toad books, actually belonged to his father, his aunt, and his uncle when they were young. He also really likes the Llama Llama books. Dragons love tacos. Dragons love tacos, and dragons love tacos too. Those two are really, really very, very popular. Life on Mars, which is a new book that we have that I really like. But he gets 3 books every night. And when I'm there, I get to read book 1 and book 2. But either Mama or Daddy has to read book 3. I'm not good for all 3 books.
So Myra is going to return to get us started on the question and answers. I don't know if all of you have already passed your questions, but if you haven't, we'll have volunteers coming around to get questions.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Maura and Anna. You both showed us tonight that books definitely leave footprints that lead us to the next book and take us to so many different places where we can examine our own lives. The train and the road. They are the destination and the journey. They are home. And as we were getting ready for Anna's visit, I constantly abbreviated her name with AQ all the time. It was AQ this, AQ that. But now it's time for Q&A. And we're going to flip that a little bit. We have some volunteers that are coming around with questions, or to collect your questions, I should say. And I have a few here now. So anybody else have any other ones that they want to pass up? All right. Okay. Question. Was One True Thing based on a personal experience? And at what age did you begin thinking of writing your first book? So those are...
I'll take the second part first.
Okay.
I published Living Out Loud, which was a collection of my columns, when I was 36. And I know exactly what age I was because I was enormously pregnant with my 3rd kid. And in fact, I didn't make it to the last 2 cities on book tour because I started to dilate. Although she didn't make an appearance for another 6 weeks. My kids, who are used to the idea of wunderkinds, were astonished to discover that I had waited so very long to publish my first book. So I was happy to be able to tell them that I was 36, and also to be able to tell them that one of my favorite British writers is a woman named Mary Wesley. And Mary Wesley published her first novel when she was 71. So when people say to me, you know, I've always wanted to write a book, but I'm too old now, I say, you are never too old if you have a book in you, because Mary Wesley had a number of them, and they're wonderful novels. As for One True Thing, as I mentioned, I did nurse my mother through cancer, which is part of the scenario of One True Thing. What I will say, however, is Ellen Goulden, George Goulden, and Kate Goulden, who are the 3 characters at the center of the book, are so utterly different from me, my mother, and my father that it takes the book way out of the realm of autobiography. I mean, I think most of us start out with a first novel that's highly autobiographical. Portnoy's Complaint, for example, and then with each successive book, move farther and farther away from it. And so with One True Thing, there was that background that I knew, but as I said, the characters were quite different.
True. This is a follow-up, I guess, to that. Do you develop your characters first or your plot?
Yes, I have no interest in plot, zero interest in plot. In fact, when I handed in Object Lessons, my first novel, which required a good deal of work, my editor then, who is still my editor now, has been my editor on every book, I'm a very lucky woman, said to me, you know, the characters are so resonant and the writing's beautiful, but nothing really happens. And I said, yes, that's just like real life. And Kate looked down at the manuscript on her desk and said, and that's why we call this a novel. And what I eventually realized was characters are all I care about. Characterization is all I care about. A slowly developing sense of my protagonist is really the mental beginnings of a novel for me before I've even written a single word. But if you put strong characters together in almost any situation, they bounce off of each other, and that bouncing is plot. So characterization is always job one for me.
I find your settings fascinating too, and I'm reading Alternate Side right now, and we were in New York City with the whole parking scenario, having to go to the opposite side of the street when the street cleaners came. And I wonder, in your other books too, do you, obviously you live in New York, but with your other books, are you visiting those places, reading about those places, experiencing them?
There's always a cheat in every novel. There's always one thing where I say, this will make life a little bit easier for me. In Blessings, for example, the place, the house and the grounds where Blessings takes place started out as some variation on a house that I own in rural Pennsylvania. Of course, what happens after a while is that you get halfway through and you think, I want a tree there. And there's not a tree at your house, but there's a tree at Lydia Blessing's house. And so you move away from it. And so in each novel, there's been something that is my little cheat. In Alternate Side, it's kind of a big cheat, which is after all these years of being a newspaper reporter in New York City and also living in Manhattan, I really know New York City. Not only do I really know it, but I love it so much that I think in that novel it's practically a character,
Yeah,
and a very beloved character. I mean, I just couldn't love it more.
Although the husband in the book, he wants to leave. He wants to leave the city. So what mindset do you put yourself in before you write, is a question we just received.
This is my great opportunity to say my favorite thing I love to say in public, especially at a high school. I wish there were more high school students here. I really, really, really hate to write. I really hate it. I hate it and I fear it. Because writing really isn't about putting words together. It's a constant process of judgment. It's a constant process of looking at what you've done or anticipating what you are going to do and hearing a voice in your head say, not good enough. Not interesting, not poetic, not compelling. You know, you'd think the more you do it, those voices would they get louder because those voices are saying, well, this is not as good as Still Life with Breadcrumbs. Well, this is not as good as Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake. And I would like to do almost anything more than I would like to write. And in fact, I have an entire routine every morning designed to help me not write. So I run or walk 4 miles every morning. I talk to my best friend on the phone every morning. If I didn't have somebody who folds towels in the house, I'd fold towels. That's how bad it is. I'd fold towels. And then at a certain point, I'd just run out of stuff. Then I go upstairs to my office and butt in chair. I mean, that's one of the great lessons of writing, butt in chair. So I put butt in chair, and the one thing that I found over the years that really, really helps me is the day before, I never knock off at the end of a chapter. And I never knock off at the end of a paragraph. And I never knock off at the end of a sentence. I knock off mid-sentence. Because if the next morning I come to a half-finished sentence, even on the worst days I can manage to finish that sentence. And often that will lead to the next sentence. So the reason I like to say this to students is because they've bought into what I think is a particularly American sensibility, that if you're good at something, it must be effortless. You must be a natural. This must come easy to you, right? And the problem with that is that when they then sit down to write, and it's hard, and they don't feel that they're good at it, they conclude that they're not writers. And that's a great tragedy for at least a few of them who may well be writers. So I want them to understand that virtually everybody I know who does this for a living, including the most successful people in the practice, struggles. And that if they're struggling, it just makes them just like us.
That was another question, advice that you would have for inspiring writers, and I think.
Butt in chair.
Yeah. Okay.
But people say to me all the time, I'm thinking about writing a book. And it's all I can do not to say, does anybody say, I'm thinking about performing surgery? I mean, people say I'm thinking about writing a book because covertly they believe that writing a book is not that hard. And I guess someday I'll meet someone for whom writing a book is not that hard. But I haven't met him yet, and I know a lot of writers.
Is your husband a reader, and how have you influenced his reading and he yours?
Well, I think there's an interesting gender dichotomy in reading and in book buying, frankly. Women buy about 85% of hardcover fiction, which is why when someone says to me, usually a man, usually with a covert agenda, do you mind that most of your readers are women? I say, no, that's why I keep being on the bestseller list, because women buy most of the hardcover fiction. Men overwhelmingly buy and read biography and nonfiction. And it's clearly this and history. It's clearly this gender line that it really attaches. The interesting thing is, it doesn't attach until later on. Young girls read fiction, and young boys read fiction, but at a certain point, it diverges. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be true of the millennial generation. I find many more guys who read fiction among millennials, and it might be because there were better books for boys in middle grade and YA fiction, but it's one of those dichotomies that I find really interesting.
Here's one. What is your favorite novel, and who is your favorite author? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, favorites, apples and oranges. I would say that the writer that looms largest in my life as someone to model myself on and to read and reread over and over again is and has always been Charles Dickens. From a very early age, I just really felt that Dickens did something that I wanted to aspire to, that he had secondary characters who lived just this edge of parody, but without falling over, and that he had primary characters who were bringing to life social issues without you feeling that you were being hit over the head with social issues. And I just always felt like there was a kind of an intense verisimilitude about all of Dickens' characters that was belied in some kind of odd way by the situations they were in and the people they were. I mean, one of my favorite stories to tell about about the power of books, about the power of fiction, is a story about Dickens sailing to the United States while, it must be the old Curiosity Shop, was being serialized in London, which meant that it was getting to the United States weeks after it had appeared in London. And I can't remember whether he was going to Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, but the boat was coming in, and the pier was filled with people, which always happened when Dickens went anywhere. But they were all crying, "Does Little Nell live?" Now, it's what you asked me about Miller's Valley. Little Nell never lived, except in the mind of Charles Dickens, and then in the hearts and minds not only of millions of readers then, but up until the present day. And the power and the ability to do that is just, it's just overwhelming to me when it happens. But, you know, I say Dickens, and then I think of Jane Austen, who was such, I mean, Sir Walter Scott said something like, "The big bow wow I can do like no one going." And then he compared and contrasted it to her ability to evoke the quieter emotions and scenes, and said, I just don't have that gift. And I'm always, you know, I'm always wowed by Jane Austen when I reread her, and I do that frequently. And Edith Wharton, I love all of Wharton's work. I find it so powerful. Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury. Some writers who have really fallen out of vogue. This summer I reread My Antonia by Willa Cather. It's an almost perfect novel. Ford Madox Ford, Theodore Dreiser. The richness of what's available. I mean, you could do nothing but read every day for the rest of your life, and you wouldn't even begin to hit the tip of the iceberg, and I just find that thrilling.
We, in the library, just in case there's a little PSA here, we have a lot of the book lists that Anna has put in the book, How Reading Changed My Life. She puts a lot of 10 lists together. So 10 books I would save in a fire, 10 books I would like to find in a cabin. And so we have those on display. So you can, if you're not able to write all these titles down and authors, do come to the library because we have plenty of them for you to check out there.
Well, even if you don't look at my book list, come to the library anyhow, because you know, most of America has lost its town squares, and the libraries of this country, and it's particularly resonant to say this here where Andrew Carnegie first dreamed up the idea that what a rich man could do with his money is to build beautiful libraries all over this country. Libraries have become those town squares. They've become the only place in our society where you can sit and think and meet and exchange ideas and not have to buy anything. And a community with a strong library is by definition a strong community, which is why I always jump at the chance to do library events.
We were honored. Anna stopped before coming here. Maura brought her to the library, so she did have a chance to see it, and we were very tickled that you took the time to do that. One of the books that was on our book club wall that many of you know was Carnegie's Maid, and Anna had read that and loved it, and we had Marie Benedict this summer at our Read Local event. So that story, that historical fiction, and the way she twisted it really did bring that excitement of old Pittsburgh and the giving philanthropy behind the Carnegie family. So thank you for that. Here's a thank you from someone. Thank you for calling out the Earth Tone 70 decor for what it was, the color of dirt. Were you a devotee of Irma Bombeck growing up?
Well, everybody was a devotee of Irma Bombeck, but I always kind of surprise myself by being funny. I like to think in real life I kind of am, but every time I fire something off in a book, I go, ha!
We did a book club for book club's event, and we were talking a lot about Nannerville, and also lots of candles, plenty of cake. And I don't know which book it came from, but you talked about child rearing and said, when they're little, it's true and false question. The answers are true, false. When they're a little bit older, it's multiple choice. But then as your children get older, it's the endless essay. So as a grandmother, how are you answering those questions that maybe you come in contact with your kids or grandchildren?
Well, I don't have to answer those questions, and it's really important for me to remember that. In Nannerville, there's a moment where Arthur is maybe 7 months old, and Christmas is approaching, and I say, "Oh, goody, I get to be Santa again." And my son Quinn says to me, "Mom, I think I'm Santa." And it was one of those moments that makes you realize your place in the continuum. I have a powerful, constant relationship with my grandchildren, but it's really important for me to remember that I am not their mother. And, that kind of Paula Spann, who writes about grandparenting for the New York Times, used a term when she was talking to me about it that I hadn't heard before, but it's kind of perfect. It's a mediated relationship. You have to go through somebody else to get to it, which is why you should be as respectful and careful with the somebody else as you can find it in your heart to be.
That's good advice. This one, I hadn't read Miller's Valley, so whose baby was the father in Miller's Valley? Do you give that answer? I'm not sure.
So here's the thing about Miller's Valley. As you can tell, this is a question I have been asked before. Miller's Valley is told in the first person by Mimi Miller. So the reader and the writer only knows as much as Mimi knows. And Mimi doesn't know the answer to that question. In fact, she goes out of her way in the penultimate chapter of the book not to know the answer to that question because everything surrounding that question is so fraught for her in terms of her relationship with her family. So the answer is, I do not know.
All right. We have some people here from West Virginia who would like to know a little bit more about the boarding school you attended and your experiences there.
Oh, I have to stop messing with those nuns. If only I had turned out to be a miscreant. So I had 2 wonderful years at Mount DeChantal Academy, which is a convent boarding school in Wheeling, West Virginia. It actually doesn't exist anymore. It was a big, rambling building. How they paid the heating bills even then is kind of a miracle to me. It was run by the visitation nuns who were semi-cloistered. That they could interact with us, but when our parents came, for example, they tended to see them through a kind of a screen arrangement, and that was just about as weird as it sounds saying it. Anyhow, you may say to yourself, the woman we're listening to here tonight does not seem like a natural fit for a convent school. Having said that, I was very happy there. I had a great group of friends. One of them is still a friend of mine, and she is the one with whom I snuck out in the middle of the night during my sophomore year on a number of occasions, and finally got caught doing so. Both of us were suspended and had to go home for 2 weeks. Then we came back, and one of us was, in the parlance of girls' schools, asked to leave because one of us was seen as kind of the evil genius, and she was seen as a good girl who had been led astray by me. I have very fond memories of that school. I have very fond memories of Wheeling. And by the way, the sneaking out in the middle of the night thing, I don't know if it still exists, but there was a restaurant there called, was it Bob's Big, Arby's Big Boy? It was big. It was definitely Big Boy. It was actually owned by the family of one of my fellow students at the Mount, and they made this like hot sandwich that had ham and cheese and stuff in it. Even today, I have fond memories of that sandwich. And it was open all night, so when we snuck out in the middle of the night, we went and had those sandwiches. So while it sounds pretty racy, it was all about the food. And come to think about it, you know, that's still where I am. You can keep your racy, I'll take the food.
Wonderful. And then, didn't you take a trip to Pittsburgh also, to Joseph Horn's company?
Yeah, my parents used to, the first year my parents were living in Wheeling, because my father was a management consultant and had taken over the running of a company. And they would take me from time to time to Pittsburgh, and my mother took me shopping at Horn's. I actually got, I think it was a boucle dress, shift dress, that I've, again, have very fond memories of from Pittsburgh. But, you know, when I was at the Mount, and we weren't allowed to leave very much, going to Pittsburgh felt like Paris to me. So, I've always had a soft spot for Pittsburgh because of that.
I think many of us can relate to that, going to Pittsburgh.
Also, West Virginia at the time, I don't know if it's still true, but they had something called 3-2 beer. Like, it didn't really taste like beer, apparently. Not that I knew. I was a teenager, of course. And Pennsylvania had, like, real beer. So people would drive to Pennsylvania and Ohio to get real beer.
And one last question. When writing Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake, as you did write that as a memoir, what are some books you might recommend to that generation of those of us in our 60s?
Well, the Mary Wesley books, the Mary Wesley novels all do include protagonists who are in their 60s and 70s, and they're beautifully done and very, very resonant. So I would suggest those. You know, it was funny when originally my title was Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake, a memoir of aging. And everybody at Random House went, yeah, we're taking of aging out. And I realized how unusual it was for somebody to write a memoir that celebrated getting older. And there aren't so many of them. I think it's more in fiction that you encounter older protagonists who are living vivid, happy lives. So I would recommend the novels of Mary Wesley.
Okay.
And can I say two more things? First of all, once again, I want to say that a cappella group totally rocks. I know a little bit about a cappella, and they are really, really good. And I hope they win that competition, but anyhow. But the second thing is, as I said, I spend most of my time in a little room all by myself with imaginary people. And a lot of that time is spent thinking, is anybody going to read this? So to actually go out into the world and see real readers, I can just live on this for the next 6 months. So thank you very much.